Hello and welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, August 5th, 2025, and we're focused on a Digital World Town Hall meeting. The primary goal of the meeting is to provide updates, objectives on the prior week, and then to focus on any kind of open questions that people may have. We're grateful for you taking the time. I know that you may have a busy schedule wherever you are in the part of the world that you're in. We're also joined by a live Q&A team that's been with us every week. Well, I shouldn't say every week, but I'd say 95% of the weeks for the many years. And we're grateful for all that they do as far as driving awareness and being able to be with us as we continue this progress. So thank you for your attendance there as well. Grateful for those co-hosts that are continuing to always be there. Adam, Wally, John, thank you for all that you do. And we're going to have a quick opening prayer by John. John, if you want to go ahead and just give us an opening prayer, that would be greatly appreciated.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this day that we have. We're grateful for this town hall meeting that we have every week to be updated, to discuss. Father, we pray that will lead us and guide us and help us make the correct decisions consistently. We pray that will help us be able to take in a lot of information. We don't know everything. But we love to learn. And we pray that as we seek earnestly and as our hearts are directed towards thee, we will learn and we will be put on the right path. Father, we're so grateful for thy Son, Jesus Christ, for all he's done for us. And we say these things humbly in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for bringing the Spirit with you, John. Appreciate all that you do. For those that need a reminder, this is a private membership association, which is a key part of what the digital world is all about, privacy. And for the individual to be able to be one and to be able to own their own identity, their own voice, their own assets, and really be able to connect with generations over generations. And there's a lot of elements that tie to that. So we're grateful for the opportunity to know that and to be able to be a part of that. For those that may be new, the obstacle that the digital world is focused on is overcoming secret combinations that tie to centralized things. There's many of them. We won't talk a lot about the details, but if you're paying attention, you'll see it. It may be confusing to others, but basically there's private environments and there's public environments. And the goal is to be able to bring transparency to the private environments, but at the same time, enable humanity to be private. I know that may sound confusing to many, but hopefully as you pay attention over the years, you'll find that decentralization is really the key to that. We believe that it is a true and correct principle that through decentralization, people can actually own their own identity, their own data, really everything. Like, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but in the last month, 18 billion passwords have been violated. That's like how many people are there in the world and how many accounts do they have? What they're doing is they're basically combining a bunch of different accounts from Apple or from LinkedIn or from Google. And they basically profile people based upon using AI and linking up usernames and passwords. And it's easy to hack stuff if you're running two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So when you have centralized systems, even though they add the systems up, it really is not secure. Usernames and passwords are not secure. The individual needs to own their own identity and then log into other systems and validate who they are instead of having centralized systems basically dictate who they are and potentially mute them or program systems, money, AI, other things in the future to be able to control them. So more than ever, even way before the AI revolution and shift started, decentralization was a true and correct principle that the digital world and Clear Community started focusing on back in 2009. The way that it's focused on is by basically enabling 12 words. And these are randomized words that the individual's given. And then once they do that, they link who they physically are with them. And then they use derived keys from there on out. So key management is a very key and important element of what this work is all about. The work primarily ties around connecting or bridging the digital and physical worlds through enabling decentralized technology and even forms of stability, which we'll talk a lot about in this coming weeks. Decentralized identity, derived keys, and digital payments are the cornerstone three elements that basically make things really usable, really secure, and really affordable that shift the future systems of software development. The primary goal and focus, or at least measurements, are around the exchange, the phones, the homes, the autos, and then the community, which ties to really the future of social platforms, which we'll talk a little bit about during this meeting. This last week, we had an opportunity to connect with a dear old friend who basically we've worked with, and a lot of these things are built on his shoulders, Sam Smith. He's a direct descendant of a very important person 4 or 5 generations ago, but he is an individual that has really, in my opinion, built the key management architecture for future generations. And he's just a stellar individual, wonderful man, and grateful for the opportunity to work with him and know him and build with him. So there's been 3 or 4 meetings this last week, and we hope to be able to review some of the progress that are outcomes within those different environments. Actually, I'm sorry, but I've got to... What happened here? Oh boy. Well, there you have it. So I don't know what happened, but yeah, so we just had to update a couple different things. So hopefully that fixes. I wonder what happened. Anyways, it should be fixed now. So for those that were not aware, this is actually Sam Smith, and I guess a lot of that other stuff may not have been streaming. But one of the advancements that we've actually seen this last week is, I'm going to shut this thing off. Looks like we had someone come in, a lot of noise.
Sorry.
You're all good. I hear you. Yeah, no worries. We're kind of in a transition of getting rid of some tickers. Shouldn't be here. It kind of went all weird on us. I don't know why it's... Anyhow, yeah. So this last week, we've also been updating some of the Utah Life program and it's not completed yet, but we're working on getting approval to go through a new act that would go through the Senate within this next year around a payment process for the state of Utah. So that has actually been started. There's some assets that are actually in the process of being approved and reviewed that will actually tie to, when you see assets like this that have the 3 circles to them, it's actually a wrapped asset that has some other form. So it may be like a real estate investment trust that actually has real property that's put into it, or maybe like decentralized or Bitcoin that's actually wrapped. So it's real time and private, but it actually is held. So there's a holding element that actually balances it out. So I hope that makes sense as well. The ones that will be normal will look like this. So these are basically ones that will be going live within the exchange over multiple different exchanges over the next week or 2. But we look forward to kind of divulging some of the details there. There's also, when we look at, and I'm going to drop out of here and kind of tie a little bit to the pilot within Utah. So the Utah Life pilot, there are actually some laws that have already been passed. So these are not in current, House bills or Senate bills or legislation processes, but they've already been completed. And there's actually 6 of them. For those that this might be new, the Privacy Act is one of them, and that's a very core part of it. The next one is the Digital Choice Act. And this Digital Choice Act will actually tie to how individuals can actually move around within social platforms, Facebook, X, LinkedIn, etc. And the data that is posted there, how it actually becomes their own. And if that's not afforded to them, how there's financial consequences, similar to what happened with GDPR within the European Union, and how Microsoft and Amazon and Facebook, I mean, Facebook was one of the first ones with like 5 billion. Apple's currently looking at 200 billion, which is an interesting animal. That one's not completed yet. The other ones are already completed. But the point is this Digital Choice Act is very, very key as it relates to some of the stuff that we'll be talking about, namely this Clear Sky. There's other elements, the Private Membership Association, which we talked about earlier, which it's basically just a recognition. It's like, hey, there really can be private memberships, and there can be private companies and private trusts and private assets. And there's a difference between private and public. And there's actually responsibility that comes with that as well. And then the Currency Innovation Act, which ties to some of the silver and the gold. For those of you that have not seen it before, this is an example. So you've got, instead of gold bars, you actually have really gold elements that are actually replacing what would be known as greenbacks with goldbacks. So there's some touches there that also ties to normal, gold and silver. And then House Bill 470, which is known as the Government Digital Identity Act. So these are actually laws that are already passed that are basically standing up some of the systems that we're talking about. And then Individual Identity Act, Individual Digital Identity Amendment. So this Senate bill and the House bill was actually worked on by a couple different individuals. What I was showing you earlier was Sam Smith, as well as some other folks, Amelia. So she's a very core part of it. Here, I'll see if I can find this gal here. Absolutely amazing, but she's absolutely in the middle of all of that as well. So that's kind of a touch on those types of things. What I'll do is I'll work back the other way through this process. So we're still making some progress with Clear Holdings. That is not over the finish line. If anything, I'd say this last week, there's a couple things that went steps back, but a lot of it just ties to timing. So we look forward to continuing the progress and the report outs there. So Clear Holdings, as well as Digital Holdings, two different entity. The Digital Holdings will be continually focused on decentralized systems or exchanges, where Clear Holdings will focus on taking a percentage of the different Clear companies into centralized systems, such as Wall Street. So the NASDAQ is actually what the target was for this. So we look forward to continually giving you an update there, but it's still early times. Some of the core advancements this last week have been tied around everything getting a life. And what I mean by that is, let's see if I can pull up. Actually, I'm going to drop into here. When we jump into this environment, so you can kind of see it here really well, but basically there's a life ID that ties to really every living thing. So I don't know if you can see here, but Mr. Sheep, so to speak, you can kind of see details around, maybe it's a certain type of process of death, or maybe how it's grown, or maybe it's what its certifications. But working with different counties within the state of Utah has actually gone from 2 to 6 to now 9. And the latest one will actually physically be going to the counties later on this week on Friday. But basically, this particular one is a sheep on how you can actually manage supply chain within a sheep's life. There's other things. Maybe it's a plant, it's a tree, maybe it's a fruit or a vegetable, those types of things. But basically, you have other types of assets. In this case, it's a tomato plant, and in this case, it's an animal, so to speak. So a lot of this stuff is actually getting stood up, and then how they actually tie together. So how an individual can actually not only pull in different systems, but actually how all these systems are going to come together overall. And we'll go a little bit into the depth of that, how they connect. Maybe it's in a herd, maybe it's connected up in a different way, but every living thing being able to be tracked and identified both in the physical world and in the digital world, kind of like a digital twin. and how all that basically comes together around an individual's identity. So with that being said, there's a lot of moving parts that are there. This is an advancing kind of a dashboard where you can see, who the individuals are, maybe wallets, cards, assets, balances. Maybe they've got vehicles, maybe they've got rewards, maybe there's other types of assets that they may have. And then the ability to actually go and exchange those. Maybe there's a dispute, agreements, different pilots that you can tie to, the ability to swap and to do so with different assets dynamically. So how you can actually see those in real life. And then the key is, how can you actually have multiple different assets that would actually tie, and in such a way where, let's see if I can drill into one of these. In such a way where there's any buyer or any seller can come in and actually say, I want to actually allow this to be sold at a certain price. And then for those transactions to actually be transacted real time with no fees and directly with those governing individuals that actually want them directly. Some of the things this next week that we'll be working on, in addition to some of the assets that you already see, are going to be based around carbon credits and some of the other elements that tie to that around energy and taxation and those types of things. So for me personally, that's a new type of water. I know it's been something that's been talked about for decades, but finally starting to have real world opportunities to actually operate within that environment. So those are some of those elements there. I won't dig into a lot of this stuff, but there's a lot of advancements that have happened within this environment. So you can kind of see that. So with that being said, this is actually a combination of all of your different profiles. I wonder if there's a good way that I can actually get folks to see this. Let's see if I can zoom in. So imagine the ability to actually see identity records, and they're validated from third parties, or financial records, or health records, or county records, or country records, or medical systems where you need consent to be able to access certain things, but the data actually comes to you. Or maybe have you ever wondered what your driving record is, or insurance, and how you can actually do it in such a way that it's private to the individual instead of tying into the central systems. Some of the stuff that we talked about around the social platforms, this is an example of how you'll actually be able to connect in with different platforms. For those that have been around for probably 4, maybe 5, maybe it was even 6 years ago, we launched a platform called Clear Community that allowed people to export their content, maybe it's their albums, maybe it's their photos, from Facebook, and actually be able to take those, even if it was for 20 years, and then import them into this new system, which was called the Clear Community. Problem is, it was built on centralized authentication and systems, and there really is no way to build a social platform unless you start it from the ground up using decentralized methodologies and processes from the get-go. So with that being said, this platform is going to be pretty key in the future. Vehicle registrations or records. So imagine the ability for not only registration or data on it, but what about video streams? What about other streams where the individual should be able to access and own the data versus centralized systems? So there's parts and pieces there. Digital assets, decentralized wallets, password vaults. This was a fun one we did about 5 years ago as well, a whole nother conversation. And then AI, and hopefully over the next couple of weeks, we'll share with you a little bit more progress that we've been focusing on AI. For those that were not here last week, this ties a little bit to some of the marks and elements that we'll tie to. And so that's basically a report out based upon what this was turned into this that actually ties into real-time systems, processes, procedures, etc. So let's see if there's any other ones that are important to mention. I actually can't move around real well. Genealogy is a very key and important part of it. So we'll be doing some of that, as well as different browsers and syncing them up. But the password vault's a big deal. especially when you tie it into decentralized authentication and systems. And then with the technology that was developed before, we actually had the ability to rotate passwords. So you don't even need to know your password, but you can still log in, and you can actually use your decentralized authentication process to actually do that. So there's a whole future there and dialogue there, but yeah. So with that being said, those are basically the updates within this last week. There's some other big things that we've been working on, but it's not appropriate to go through the depths and the details of what they are at this stage, just because one, they're premature, and two, they've got geopolitical topics tied to them that wouldn't be appropriate until they're actually completed. So any questions or thoughts or comments from the audience or from anyone that wants to kind of jump in? Feel free. Now is your time.
I have a question, Michael. I was just thinking about this. So let's say I own my own medical records and I give permission, I give access to my doctor. What's to stop my doctor from sharing my information with others?
Right now, in the United States and Canada, which I know you're based in Canada, they follow a similar process, or what they call a procedure. Yeah, HIPAA, Health Information and Portability and Privacy Act. Notice how some of the things I took you through before were acts. And so this policy that the medical associations, pharmaceutical, insurance, anybody that gets what's called patient information, they're supposed to be able to follow. And the reality is every single time it goes from one physician to another physician, you could be talking about feet to your eyeballs to your teeth. It doesn't matter. If it's patient information from one physician to another, what they're doing now is they have you sign HIPAA release consents, which allows them to access your data and then share your data. Not only that, but they store your data in little islands. And what they're trying to do is take these little islands, which are called EMR or HMR, for electronic records that are basically on you. They profile you, they bill you. You know, they say we did this procedure in this way at this time. And make a long story short, it basically does the opposite, exactly like what's going on with some of the acts that we're currently seeing. The Genius Act is a really good example of that. HIPAA does the opposite with health records that it was intended to do. It was supposed to protect the individual, allow the individual to have health information and portability and privacy around it, because that's actually what HIPAA stands for. At the end, it's called ACT. So they're supposed to be able to take their data and with them and move it around. The problem is there's been no central standards process or structure other than the billing. The billing protocol is what they call HL7. And this HL7 billing protocol basically allows an individual to say, I want my insurance company to know that my physician did this and this and this, and then they get paid. But it's all around the payment. The reason that we can tell you this is some of us on this call, we actually managed 100% of these transactions for the state of Utah and other environments and other systems, not only insurance companies or health providers, but the actual system itself, the payment process system itself. It's called UHIN, Utah Health Information Network. And then there's other networks in every single state that basically duplicate this. So basically, with pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies and even providers, where there's mystery, there's margin. And so what I mean by that is when someone doesn't have transparency into a particular transaction, maybe a procedure, et cetera, you know, they can bill more for it. And one of the things that you saw happen probably in March was Trump came in and said, you're not going to bill for, let's say, again, an example is, let's say there's a MRI scan that's done in Japan versus in America. The same machine from the same manufacturer to the same part of the body is like literally 10 times more expensive. Where it's $80 there, it's $800 in America. So those are the types of discrepancies that mystery and margin basically provide. Not only that, but pharmaceutical chemicals and It's not just procedures, but the point is if the individual truly was able to provide consent and access their data because of standard procedures, which is what these other acts that I was talking to you about was. So for instance, if I go back over and I talk a little bit about these acts inside of Utah, this act right here, this Digital Choice Act, is actually primarily around social data, social platforms. But the health stuff is already passed. It's actually passed with HIPAA. The thing is, inside of this act, kind of like the European Union had it have teeth with GDPR policies, where they said, hey, you have this much notice to comply. And if you don't comply, it's $2,000 per instance of violation. And that's why Apple's looking at $200 billion in violations. And Facebook paid $5 billion in violations. I don't think Apple's going to pay that much, but we'll see. So the point being is getting the individuals to actually own their own identity and data is very important and key. And it's not just around social platforms. It's around all of these other systems. And I apologize that I'm not actually digging into the details around them. I got to zoom into this interface in a crazy way. Where did it go? This guy here, but you can start seeing the construct of it coming together. So that's a good question around health. It's around data, around these different systems and environments. What just happened there?
Yeah, because if we give access to one person willingly, then what's to stop whoever we've given access to share our information with others? I mean, that's what's happening all over the place.
You're right. And the reality is there has to be a vehicle for the individual to say, I want my own data. I consent to receive my data in this form or not. And then I can actually access or get my data. In some cases, it's through what we call an API, where the providers have to provide a data export function. It's the same thing that's happening with the social platforms. So just like the Clear community was able to import from Facebook, albums and photos, etc. It's all it is data, but how do you give it back to the user is really what it comes down to. And that's really the core of when we talk about Clear and Clear companies and decentralized technologies in the digital world, that's the problem that it's solving, is allowing everyone to actually own their own identity and own their own data real time. And not only that, but imagine if you could actually access your data and then you had your own artificial intelligence that was private to you. And then that intelligence could access your data in all those different forms and data streams. And then think about it from a standpoint of what if it could actually not share your data, but learn who you are. And then who you are becomes owned by you and future generations that tie from and to you. So you're going to see with AI a whole nother opportunity of data ownership and intelligence, namely, what is our memory? What is our mind? What is our digital footprint that basically, as we go around in life and send this message and do that search and ask this question and buy this and search that, and all of this stuff is data exhaust, but what does it really equate to? And I believe that there's a future where AI can actually look at a summation of one's experience, one's life, and be able to afford them the ability to actually own who they are, own their own persona, their own memories, their own abilities. And when people start talking about some crazy stuff and maybe we'll have time to kind of go through it, but where people will actually say, I want this memory to go into this robot or not, or I want it to be able to be who I am as an individual and pass from generation to generation in a responsible, accountable way, instead of something that can be commoditized and centralized. Because that's centralization as a model is really what is one of the core issues. We believe, and we can say this because, being in the computing industry for over 30 years, and some of the team members on this call, same thing, 15 plus years, we focused on centralized systems, namely like the healthcare ones that we just went through. But it was around building up centralized support and management of other environments remotely. And through doing that, we literally ended up seeing, hey, this is the wrong model. We didn't have an instance where we were violated, and so our customers were all violated. But we have seen instances since then that basically other central service providers or managed service providers have basically been compromised. And in some of the large cases, their customers are governments. And so when you compromise the central service provider, you also compromise the other sides of it. Look at a good example is, and there's many ways to compromise. So you can actually have, a lot of different interactions where people can actually come in and say, hey, for instance, Coinbase, you had someone that actually paid folks to literally give up usernames and passwords, give up other sorts of data. Maybe it's addresses, maybe it's social security numbers. These centralized companies don't realize it today, but it's actually a really big liability to have all this data from their customers. Now, yes, do they need to have it? Sure. Do they need to have it and store it in a certain way? I believe that's going to change in time and in the future. And one of the things that's really intelligent around AI is it can look at a data set. It doesn't have to take all of the photos and the videos and the constructs. It can take a summation, kind of the metadata from it, and actually be able to have a very small footprint, but the memory sequences around the intelligence or AI can actually store with it. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it's making sense.
Wonderful. Other thoughts or comments or questions or feedback?
I had kind of a comment question to go off of what Danielle said. Is there a way when you're transacting information, like you give somebody permission for your medical records, that you can tag that information and receive a notification if that information is then transferred somewhere else?
Yeah, you can. As a matter of fact, AI is going to do some very similar things to that. For instance, right now you can say, hey, when this happens online, notify me. And AI, if you're paying attention, you'll start seeing that AI is going to take a couple different, it's not just going to be where you're asking it questions and you're getting data based upon its intelligence and searching and knowledge, but it's also going to be able to start acting for and in behalf of you. So kind of like how Google you could go in and say, hey, when somebody says this and this and this online, send me a message and let me know. That's been going on for 15 years. But AI is going to be able to say, when this type of a thing is, maybe it's shared, or maybe I got an updated record, or all of this stuff. When it's data, when it's in a data form, it can be programmed. If we can imagine it, it can be built and created. So I'm sure it's only a matter of time until that becomes a real reality. But does that make sense?
It does. And I've used that program before. Great example is I got an email notification yesterday that Google found my information on the dark web. And it's kind of like, okay, what do you do now? And I was thinking, well, if I had this rotating password system, I could just go in and rotate the passwords and that would be easy. Well, right now, a lot of people have a lot of different accounts, emails, different passwords, different things, or in worst case scenario, same password, very easy to break. But it's kind of overwhelming to keep track of all that information, especially when you have multiple things going on.
Yeah, there's actually a company that spun out of one of those centralized companies. There's many of them, but one of them is called Heroic. And we actually partnered up with them to basically run a report similar to what you're talking about, but it's even more in depth. And then a lot of other companies, including Google, basically used it. And what it would do, it would actually go through the internet and databases and find your email address, find your name, find your passwords. And then you could basically say, hey, this is who I am, or you even use one username or one password, and it would link up all of your different usernames, passwords, and it would tell you where you're violated. And there's companies that will actually pay for that for their employees, at least if this was an old one. But the bottom line is we started seeing so much of it that it just was ridiculous. And so the real solution was you decentralize your identity, then use a password manager that can then update all of your passwords. And then it cryptographically stores them so you don't ever need to know them. And like you could literally change your password every day if you wanted to, but you still log in with your centralized or decentralized identity. So the reality that usernames and passwords are still used is a joke in and of itself. It's not secure. SSL is not even secure, even though certain browsers say that they're secure. The systems and keys behind them in the browser and even at the country level are not secure. So this Kerry, or this gentleman that I was telling you about, it's not just websites or individuals, but it goes on to be many, many, many different things. I mean, you've got storage and reputation and DNS and AI and social media. All of those things need to be validated so deep fakes aren't there. I mean, I still have somebody running around. I think this is the third time that someone's taken just a photo from Facebook and basically made a post and tries to spoof as someone else. And these centralized systems aren't able to pick that up even after numerous times of saying, hey, this guy's a fake profile of this profile. So the net is, AI safety is really where the future is going. How can we live in a world where AI is everywhere in different forms, but still be safe and still be private and still prove who we are? Those are very, very big keys. And if we can prove it, if we can stand up systems from an identity standpoint that then tie into a payment standpoint, that's really where all the clear companies, get the opportunity. But everyone also gets an opportunity. Everyone can be a part of building out these new systems per se. So other thoughts?
So Michael,
Okay.
it's Beck. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah, I
but
can hear you
I
great.
just wanted to say, I don't know if you've heard of Notebook LM. It's a Google artificial intelligence. And so basically this morning, we were working with this tool, and currently I'm doing some really large work structure breakdowns in communications. And basically this tool, what it can do is you can put a full document. So we put a full Australian Institution of Management document in this Notebook AI, and it basically turned the whole document into a full podcast. The voices were different. It sounded like a real podcast, and it just blew our minds how much AI can just change something like that. And we discussed, a whole bunch of decentralized tools and all these things, but the capability that these tools are having right now with the back end kind of not fully secure was like a really eye-opener for us. So we're working on like really large work structure breakdowns of tasks to see how we can kind of combat some of these things happening through communications for our stakeholders.
I think the problem that the digital world solves around identity, built on Kerry and built on some of these wonderful, beautiful intellects like Sam's work, is really going to stop a lot of the noise that you're going to start seeing more and more and more. It's one thing to say, hey, search engines look at data a certain way, so people create pages and articles and try and do SEO to get certain attraction around it. But then you're seeing the next wave, which is people using AI to create content. Maybe it's an article, maybe it's a page, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a video. But if the movie stuff is a whole nother sector, and I think that Hollywood's going to have its work cut out for them. Think about just having an AI read a movie script and then create it. Like, you're going to see that stuff this year in very mature deployments, and it's only going to continue to get more mature over time. But you're going to see more and more noise that is, and so how does AI actually decipher from it is a part of the brilliance of AI. but it comes back to the owner. It really comes back to this simple model. Let's see if I can show it to you. This simple model of decentralization. So if AI is literally centralized, then, which by the way, it doesn't have to be. That's the big secret that the whole world is like woo over. I mean, I'm blown away at how many people are not decentralizing AI and saying, you know what, run the actual AI engine locally, like on real devices that people actually have. People can actually run an AI agent on a phone that they own. The problem is most of the manufacturers of the phones want to own the AI as well. You know, ChatGPT has a head start on the AI side of things, but who really owns the customer? Apple and Google are two of the top. So when Apple and Google actually layer their AI on top of these other environments, they're going to have a massive competitive advantage and barrier to entry that even ChatGPT doesn't have. When those folks actually, and if you don't remember, for instance, Google tried to launch Circle long ago, which was similar to a Facebook where they actually were the social platform. Now you're seeing antitrust suits, which by the way, you know, the attorney general here in Utah went after Google and won $700 million after a conversation that a couple of us on this call actually had with him. And it was around, you know, anti-monopoly type practices. And you'll continue to start seeing those things, but maybe what you'll see is behind it, you got companies that work with the customers, but in all reality, behind the scenes, they're actually sharing the large language models, because that's something that not a lot of folks in the world actually see. I do believe that one of the reasons why Facebook was actually successful early on is because they had data. They were able to see all the users and all the apps and all the adoption. That's why they bought Instagram so quickly. They saw we're going to get our competitive advantage and lunch handed to us because of the adoption, the utilization, and the engagement. That's why they kept the brand separate. That's why Instagram still exists. It just exists as a brand under Facebook. That's another thing is around, you know, some of the messaging. So WhatsApp is another conversation there. So, but the point being is how we use our data, what calls we make, what text we send, what searches we make, what AI questions we ask, all of these things, even emails. The biggest source data providers that own that stuff, I would say the number one is Google. Number two is probably between Facebook and Apple. Microsoft is way in there. People don't realize it, but Microsoft is actually LinkedIn. Microsoft is actually ChatGPT. 51% of ChatGPT is owned by Microsoft. There's a reason for it. So when we really dig into this model on the left, these centralized systems, you know, what happens when a Google and a Facebook and a ChatGPT or a Microsoft all start sharing the data behind the scenes? To your point, you know, the point is you're looking at just one document that was uploaded and a podcast that can be created from it. What happens when you get data sets? And that's why these billions of usernames and passwords that were violated, what happens when those things are actually talking to one another behind the scenes? And if you don't believe me or think, you know, that's just all in the future, go read a book by the chief legal counsel from Microsoft, at least when he wrote it. The book is called Tools and Weapons, and he literally spells this out. This was way before AI came out, but he spells out how certain FASB requests or requests of knowledge or data, whether it's criminal, history or et cetera, but basically where the government makes a request and says, hey, we want all the data for this phone number, for this name, for this email address, and you can't actually go and let the user know. But what happens when it's actually just a stroke of a pen and an API that opens up where AI can now have all the data from LinkedIn that triangulates with all the data from Facebook, that triangulates all the data from Apple and Google? You take just those four source data providers and link them together and let AI tie to the private data. So the emails, like emails shouldn't be public, but when you're actually using either Apple email or Google email, I'm so sorry, but you're you're putting your data into their system and they have access and rights to it. And through a stroke of a pen / click of a key, they can literally share that with other source data providers. And I don't think the world is really realizing or ready for the outcomes of that. But to be honest with you, that's small potatoes compared to what happens next. And it's going to make this whole identity reality so much more important. And the sad thing is majority of society just doesn't even see it. Like, we look at what's happened this last couple of weeks with, I won't even dig into some of that stuff. It's just negative. But the point being is, you know, there are many opportunities for us to actually identify the problem, roll out decentralization, stay focused on it until there is real world, not just systems and services, but massive adoption that actually provides true choice for the individual. That's the target, true choice for the individual. It's not forcing everybody to say, get rid of your Apple phone or get rid of your Google account. No, or get off of Facebook. It's like, no, but how can we actually own our own data and follow the law, follow the legal systems, follow the structure, have private individuals, have private organizations or private companies or private trusts or private, you know, financial systems that can actually enable the individual to operate in a society where the centralized systems, especially the perverted ones and the controlled ones that are just wrong, where one human or one system is controlling another, you know, especially when the dominion and structure of it is just wrong. But anyhow, I hope that your question was a really good question, and there's lots of other use cases. I don't know if other folks are seeing them, but there's lots of other good use cases that are out there. Thoughts or comments? We'll go ahead and let this amazing man. So this is a gentleman that was introduced to me by Danielle on the call, and we'll go ahead and let him speak to us a little bit about this similar type topic. Oops.
Bank in any country is legally allowed to determine the amount a bank must have on reserve. In the U.S., it's currently around 10%. So if you deposit $10,000 into the bank sets aside 10% or $1,000 and then loans out the rest of your money. The way it works is, say another person comes into the bank and asks for a car loan of $9,000. At this moment, the bank loans out the $9,000 from your original deposit. It isn't there anymore. The borrower then pays the person selling the car, and they go deposit the money into another bank, which is part of the same central banking system. This $9,000 is treated as a new deposit, and the process continues. The money gets redeposited and reloaned until the initial deposit of $10,000 becomes $100,000. The banking system just created $90,000 by loaning out your money. The way it works is that the Federal Reserve...
He does such an amazing job of articulating that, and I love what he's all about. And he's also got a really good perspective on AI as well. But this financial issue that we just talked about, or at least we just heard from Forrest, it really underscores some of the things. For instance, this last month with this Genius Act, you take the Genius Act and you take what just happened here, and then you take the same types of banks. For instance, you're going to start seeing, you know, we've got some of these players defined here. You're going to start seeing Chase and Coinbase and Circle or USDC, all of them in the big finance world doing exactly what I was just talking about with APIs that connect with one another. And if they say, hey, this account links to this account, and this is how money flows. And oh, by the way, we have, because of what's happening within the money system, we're just going to give, the government's just going to give people money, right? And so people just are quiet, like, okay, well, they're just going to give us value. But really what it's doing is it's actually going to enslave us to a point where we become dependent on it. It's like a drug, and you continually have to have the next hit. And when you don't get it, you end up going through a process where you're actually being controlled. It's kind of like food. If you don't have the food, people will go do stupid things. It's kind of, I won't even talk about COVID and the vaccine and social distancing and masks and shots and MR. I won't even talk about that stuff. What I'll talk about is when these things come together in such a way where humanity is like, I don't know another way. The Genius Act basically took the US dollar with big finance and said, big finance or banking, you can actually authorize this through your normal practices of KYC and AML. And then states, you can do X, Y, and Z. And then from a federal standpoint, you can do ABC. So when you take those three entities that tie to it, and originally in January, when a lot of this framework was brought out, that where the original Genius Act and parts and pieces of it came, they said that they were going to implement a thing called anti-CBDC, CBDC being central bank digital currency. And really what they did was they tore that, all the language around anti-CBDC out of it. And so now what you actually have is central bank digital currency, but it's structure and policy all around the US dollar. The US dollar is the new CBDC. And when people start understanding that what happens when you have central bank digital currency that's programmable money linked with identity, linked with AI, that's slavery. That is absolute slavery and centralized control. And if you don't think that the centralized control can actually be manipulated, I would say take one of the largest economies and ecosystems and one of the biggest structures. You know, you got your House, your Senate, your judiciary, your different supposed, structure within government, your three pillars within government that are supposed to keep things sound. And I would say the United States of America was just actually overrun / stolen. And I mean, you're starting to see it within this last month where they're actually coming about and saying the same thing that we've been saying for literally, it was 2011 when we first downloaded the birth certificate of Obama from the whitehouse.gov website. And then anybody can just take Photoshop and open it up in a Photoshop. I think it's all PST file, PST's an Apple or Office file, but it's a PSD file. And you can actually see the layers within that birth certificate, which was from Hawaii, which was absolutely fraudulently created. And many are saying, well, isn't anybody listening or paying attention? This is from whitehouse.gov. You can see the actual birth certificate that was stolen. So that was one of the realities when we said, you know what, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be another government that actually cares about the people. We literally incorporated in New Zealand. We moved lots of folks to New Zealand only to see the same thing happen to that government and to that ecosystem. And so when we talk about these things, decentralization truly is the only way for governance to be able to free humanity in the future. So whether it's finance, whether it's AI, whether it's a combination of it, identity is in the middle. Finance, AI, identity, the combination of those three things, it is imperative to be able to have that, to have a decentralized option for humanity. So other thoughts or comments or questions or feedback or anything? Anybody?
It's all really good stuff. Thanks for keeping up on top of it for us.
Yeah. It's, I remember over a decade ago, us having the same conversation and feeling the same type of pressure. It's interesting to see how it's all basically rolling out. One thing that's transpired this week, and I can go down this road at least enough. What if we were able to find a system that is strong, stable, consistent, in some ways responsible, a counterbalance to Wall Street, a counterbalance to BlackRock, and they basically get behind everything that we're talking about. Those are the types of advancements that we've had over this last week. Again, I can't be specific, but if you followed along for years, you may know who that is. But those types of dialogues are maturing. They're continuing to advance in a way that we actually started almost, 2017. So almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And We actually signed it, moved forward with it, the funding, everything. And then the following week, the individuals that we were working with went and met personally with Trump and said, hey, we're doing this. And they said, don't do that. Only to have 8 years later, a centralized version of it rolled out. And I don't believe that Trump intentionally knows what is happening. But the people behind the scenes, the people at Circle, the people at Coinbase, the people at Chase, I'm not even going to talk about Bank of America and some of these other things, but they know exactly what's happening. The BlackRocks that are behind them, the centralized systems that are behind them, you know, if you could choose to have an account that you actually were given and you're the only one that was given those 12 words or that private key, and you're the only one that has the responsibility to maintain those keys versus the opposite, where you go into a bank, you have to use a centralized ID, even to get in. By the way, as of May this last year, you can't even go into a bank without an ID. So you have an ID, you can open up a bank account, the account number they give to you, and you put your assets in their account. But what happens if things go sideways? They can take that account from you or the assets in that account from you. So I hope people are understanding the difference between centralized and decentralized systems. But that's basically what this is. So it's not just identity. Can you log into it or get into it? But can you actually send transactions? And can you actually do things around? I believe that it is a human right to be able to travel, which is another thing that they're going to try and do. Has anybody, and this is a question to everyone, has anybody seen the news around flights, planes every day that are having this issue and that crash and this engine and that birdie? Are you guys seeing this too? Maybe it's just.
Oh, yes. Oh, for goodness sake, yes.
It's interesting. I mean, yesterday it was like, oh, well, there's the crash of the day. Then the news after that was another one. The news after that was another one. Three terrible catastrophes in one day, which beforehand, I swear a year ago, it would be once a quarter you'd hear about this stuff. So it'll be interesting to see. I wonder if, I don't know. I'm convinced it's going to be some type of centralized control at the airports around travel. And, I don't know. I don't know where they're going with it, but it's very interesting to see. Anybody else seeing the plane issues, specifically planes that are crashing all over the place, like news alerts that they're having these issues?
Yeah, it seems to be happening quite often.
Whereas, I don't know that the flights are necessarily massively increasing over a year or two ago. But the volume of, I wonder if there's a way to actually see statistics around mentions of plane catastrophes per day from 10 years ago to 5 years ago to a year ago versus now. And I wonder what they're planning behind the scenes, because it's just a narrative. It's an absolute narrative. So anyways, we'll see what that is. But the digital world is focused on three things that are human rights. One is around, it's a right to be private. Two, it's a right to travel. And three, it's a right to be able to transact. And these centralized systems are going to try and violate all of those rights. And yeah, so other questions or thoughts or comments? Any feedback or observation, positive or negative? Anything anyone wants to bring up or go through?
So I have a cold wallet, a Ledger cold wallet, and when I set it up, it gave me 12 words. So I'm assuming that my assets are secure on there.
Yeah, those 12 words work a similar way to 12 words with the Life app or like the Clear phones, where
Okay.
they're basically a key. It's actually a string of words. It's crypto, which is short for cryptography, which is really math. And it's using math to basically give you a key. And they derive those 12, I shouldn't use the word derive because it's going to confuse you there. They take those 12 words and they take that key and turn them into 12 words. So the 12 words in a certain order and sequence. By the way, you can't miss a letter, you can't reorder them, but if you put those 12 words in with that particular, I think you said treasure, that particular device will then allow you to access the content that's on that device. Now, it doesn't link with you physically, so with your face or your finger. So if someone gets the 12 words and they don't need you, they can still get access to those assets. So that's one thing that's important to note. In the digital world, it actually connects to you physically, but in a private way. So you're the only one that has all 5 factors that can tie to derived keys or the authentication process that is tied to this ecosystem. So the digital world is much more secure than a treasure type environment, primarily because of the 5-factor authentication that goes behind it. So it's not just 12 words and they're in and they do what they want. In some ways, the treasures also have a password, so like a 4-digit PIN in addition to it. You can also put passwords. They also have little metal things that you can say, even in a fire, I've got these steel little letters that I built the words and I put them in a sequence. And so even if it's a fire, I can still access it. But key management should be a responsibility of the individual. And that's where it should end, and if we can be responsible for those 12 words and understand key management, I believe that there's an opportunity for service providers to offer systems and services that can enable data, not just mail or calendar or contacts or presentations or Word or Sheets alternatives, but AI data that derives from those, that is you, that can actually be managed for many generations, whether it's 10 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years. Imagine a service where you could say, you know what, for $50, I can pay for my data for 100 years. Or for $5,000, I can do it for 1,000 years. Those are the types of data structures and storage systems that are behind the scenes, but they use what's called data sharding. So if you take a photo, it breaks it into 1,000 pieces and stores it in 1,000 locations, and you're the only one that can access that. Well, what happens if AI can actually access it and take a derived, I shouldn't use the word derived, it's going to confuse you on that one too, but it can actually take a snapshot of the data in such a way where it can actually store it in a very small use case. And the way that these AIs can actually use large data models is because of how they actually simplify the data down and deduplicate it in such a way where they don't need the data anymore, but they know the spirit or intent of what it actually said. So it's really taking the large language models to a construct that ties to the individual, but that also ties to memory systems for the future. Like, we can't even imagine what's going to happen in 5 generations from now when we're talking about data sets. And I hope we're talking about data, and I hope we don't have, this last week, for just a timestamp, this is the first time in a long time that the United States of America has dispatched 2 submarines, nuclear submarines, as a deterrent into Russian-based environments or waters in a form of an act of war. That happened this last week. And I just hope in 5 generations, we're continuing to wonder about this stuff and people haven't actually launched a bunch of weapons. So with that being said, I don't want to end on a negative note, but it's a wonderful time to be able to be exposed to this stuff. I mean, look at what's happening with data. Look at, for the first time, I had a child that actually went to the dentist and they used AI to actually see what's going on. And the dentist was like, you don't need this type of a filling, whereas a normal So there was 2 dentists. So one dentist said you need 6 fillings, and one dentist said you don't need any. You just do this and it's gone. I mean, the point that I'm trying to drive at is AI can absolutely add value in all of our lives, but it needs to do so with the individual in the center and not centralized systems in the center. So with that being said, any other questions or thoughts or comments or observations or recommendations or any holes you want to shoot in anything? Now's the time. Feel free. If not, Susan, would you be able to close us today? Pretty please?
Yes, sure, Mike. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Heavenly Father, we want to honor you as we close this meeting. We are grateful for all of your blessings and ask that you help us to be blessings to others. Let the work discussed today and the future work left to be done come to fruition, and it be all for your glory. Please give us your hand of protection and keep everyone safe during the week until we meet again. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. Enjoy your sweet spirit. We'll see you all next week. Much love.